deadly, they turned the Caribbean into a vast battlefield. Day after day, the pirates struck fear into the hearts of seafarers. And then, one day, everything changed. Our story begins in Jamaica. The Arawak Indians called it the land of wood and water. Columbus called it the most beautiful land he had ever seen. Today, the Blue Mountain Island is a thriving center of agriculture and tourism. But back in 1655, when England conquered it, seizing it from Spain, Jamaica became the site of an international conflict, a battle for the riches of the New World. It all began when the island's British governor Doyle, under siege from the Spanish, made a pact with the devil. Doyle knew that pirates prowled near Hispaniola, today's Haiti, plundering Spanish galleons. And so he invited the pirates, the so-called Brethren of the Coast, to use his island, Jamaica, to launch raids against their common enemy, the Spanish. The Buccaneers' base of operations was a small island harbor, Port Royal. Here, the pirate flag flew high. And soon, the tiny town was transformed into something much more. The richest city in the Western Hemisphere, and the most dissolute as well. A town overrun with money and loose morals. Port Royal will become known as the wickedest city in Christendom. Architect Oliver Cox has studied Port Royal for years, building by building, street by street.
Like any town, port town, it contained a tremendous mixture of population. It had hundreds of taverns and bars and brothels. It had 2 prisons. It had several churches, a synagogue, as well as all of the military and naval men.
It was said, in fact, that there was 1 bar or brothel for every 10 men in Port Royal. The taverns built then flourished with all the pirate gold that flowed through their doors.
They said the main street of Port Royal was richer than Cheapside. Now that was the main trading street in the center of the city of London at the time.
And most of those riches were due to just one thing: Jamaica's favorable location, for the island was situated in the heart of the Spanish trading route. Ships traveling from South America to Spain put in at Havana first, and they all passed right by Jamaica, by the Buccaneers of Port Royal. The ships from Cartagena were always full of treasure. Once the harbor of Columbus, Cartagena was the pearl of colonial America. It was the treasure chest of the New World, the central shipping point through which the Spanish transferred all the plundered wealth of the conquistadors. No other city was such a magnet for adventurers, seafarers, and soldiers of fortune. The Treasures came from all across conquered South America. Emeralds, gold, silver, jewels, indescribable wealth. In Cartagena, the treasure was well protected. But just beyond the fortified walls, the trouble began. For the voyage back to Spain was long and perilous, and on the way, only the harbor of Havana offered protection. Here, the fortified walls and heavy cannons of El Morro stood guard. But all around lurked danger. Pirates. The flag of the buccaneers could be seen clear across the Caribbean. Because of the ever-present menace, the islands of the Caribbean were heavily fortified. Even now, the battlements loom above them like eagles' nests. Thick walls testified to the relentless clashes. And they were not only against the buccaneers, for here, far from home, all the old European nations, England, France, Holland, and Spain, all were engaged in a struggle for power, a struggle to capture the incredible wealth of the Americas. The islands served as fortresses from which to wage war. The naval battles around them were long and fierce, and many great ships were sent to the bottom of the sea. And so, we set out on the trail of the past, on the trail of the richly laden boats that were sunk all those years ago. For centuries, the debris from the naval battles, the wreckage of pirate attacks, has been lying in the depths of the Caribbean. All around the islands of the West Indies, scattered on the seabed, are the bits and pieces which have survived the years. A cannon. A chest. Ship's planks. These are the remnants of the great galleons, the remains of once proud ships from long ago, today guarded only by the fish. Cannonballs brought these and so many other ships to an untimely demise, the vicious handiwork of the pirates. Bartholomeus, Rock, Blackbeard, these are the buccaneers who ravaged the Caribbean, and it was men like this who made Port Royal rich.
And the pirates said, if you give us permission, we will capture only the French and the Spanish ships, so long as we can use your harbour. And from that moment, from 1655 to 1690, the city grew at a faster rate than any new towns built since the last war, at a huge rate. And it became from nothing to a city of 1,000 people.
Of all the pirates, it is mainly the infamous Henry Morgan who became synonymous with Port Royal. After each of his notorious raids, he always returned to the harbor. Historian Roderick Ebanks recalls Morgan's impact on the city.
Morgan was one of the best-known pirates, buccaneers in his time. He seems to have been a man who had a lot of leadership ability, and so he was able to organize the largest number of pirates who operated from Port Royal. He was a very brutal, very violent man who used terrorism to frighten the Spanish. And he brought millions of dollars worth of bullion and silver and gold into Port Royal. This money financed trading activities, and it also helped to finance the slave system that was set up in Jamaica.
Amazingly enough, Henry Morgan was knighted and made lieutenant governor of the island in 1672. The town became a trading center to rival even Britain. These were the best of times for Port Royal. The money flowed through Port Royal like water through a sieve.
We have a saying in Jamaica, easy come, easy go. So the pirates would come in with a lot of money, and they would spend it in the taverns and the brothels. They would gamble it out.
But then, one day, everything changed. On June 7th, 1692, tragedy struck, and the city trembled when a terrible earthquake shook the island, and the seas rose up. In one terrible instant, the force of nature descended upon this dissolute city like the wrath of God. One eyewitness, the priest Emmanuel Heath, described the events. I found the ground rolling and moving under my feet. I saw the earth open and swallow up a multitude of people, and the sea mounting in upon us over the fortifications. A city which minutes before had been pulsating with life simply disappeared, devoured by the sea. The fortifications built against foreign enemies were no use against the greater foe, nature. Before the earthquake, Port Royal covered an area of 60 acres. After the catastrophe, less than half, only 25 acres, remained. Port Royal was now cut off from the mainland. The wounds inflicted upon Port Royal by the earthquake have yet to heal. It is now only a shadow of its former self. The old Port Royal, a sunken city. Even the old cemetery with the grave of Henry Morgan was swallowed up by the sea. A new cemetery had to be established to bury all the dead, crushed under collapsed walls or washed up by the sea. In all, 2,000 people died, almost the entire population. Only a few buildings survived the quake. Their walls are still standing today, but life departed long ago. They stand as memorials, as warning signs. Fort Charles, too, lingers like a ghost town. Empty and silent, its walls and cannons are a sad relic. Testaments to a terrible time when the richest city in the Western Hemisphere was suddenly transformed into a city of the dead. A city swallowed up and lost under the waves.
The sunken city begins about 400 yards down the coast, and it gradually angles out until it reaches that beacon. Then from the beacon, it comes across to the Coast Guard facility to Chocolata Hall, the present parade ground. So all of this is sunken city. All of this is that part that has never ever been reclaimed.
The sunken city. We want to see it, a metropolis buried beneath the waves. For it was not only walls and buildings that were devoured by the sea in 1692, but unimaginable riches. The gold and silver of one of the wealthiest cities in the world, as Michael Cox confirms.
There is, under the water here, a hidden treasure, you're right. There is also a treasure under the lower parts of the land, which has been subsequently filled up. And so the treasure is not for treasure seekers and not easy for them to find. And the government of Jamaica try and make sure that treasure seekers don't come diving there.
The temptations of the sunken city are great. But right behind any would-be treasure hunters is the Coast Guard. They follow our boat out into the harbor. Not for one moment do they let us out of their sight. Exaggerated precautions? Not really. Already, too many treasures have disappeared, snatched up by illegal diving expeditions. Only with the Coast Guard's agreement, only with their accompaniment, will they let us dive at all.
Ready? Okay.
Below the surface, visibility is limited to a few yards. The first thing discernible on the seabeds are the traps left by island fishermen. But there is no gold shimmering in these cages, just a few fat moray eels. The more we look, the more we realize there are no streets awaiting us down here, no walls or sculptures, only layers of mud and sand. The sunken city, you have to imagine it. It lies buried under 3 centuries of debris. In the past few decades, several teams of archaeologists have searched the seabed here. Their handiwork is in place, strings that mark the outlines of buildings and streets. But it's a hard task. To uncover the old Port Royal, they have to make their way through thick layers of silt and coral, only to find that days later, their work was in vain. Still, there have been successes. In the 1960s, 2 large caches of Spanish silver coins were reportedly found here. And everyone who has had any dealings with Port Royal is certain of one thing. There are many more treasures to be discovered in the sunken city. For here in the sand lies gold, the dream of every treasure hunter. Yet, what the archaeologists have uncovered is mostly the traces of pirate life. So far, the greatest finds have been mere fragments. In Port Royal's museum, the old military hospital, lie the treasures, priceless pieces of the past. Some are the rich goods of trade ships, some the actual personal possessions of pirates, revealing the way they lived.
We have here also a baluster. They tend to come in varying sizes, and they're all pewter again, and this was used as large as a decanter for pouring wine. The wine usually are stored in onion bottles. Again, the onion bottles were of varying sizes, but they were largely of this size. From the number of onion bottles retrieved, gives us an idea of the extent to which alcohol was consumed in Port Royal pre-1692.
The archaeologists have salvaged Indian handicrafts, fine Chinese porcelain, English bowls, the keys to a culture frozen in time. Perhaps the most intriguing treasure is not to be found among the exhibits of the museum, but in a small church nearby. The silver service of the top pirate of all, Henry Morgan.
This was a microcosm of the mixture of different ethnic origins, Indian, Afro-American, African slaves, and the Americas too coming over. And they were all mixed together, living cheek by jowl. And of course, having to live together in that way was totally different from any other part of the plantation lands, where the blacks were in one little slave quarter and the rich plantation owners had great castles to themselves.
Welcome to Jamaica, where the rum come from. The rum come from, where the rum come from. Welcome to Jamaica, where the rum come from. Relax and have some fun.
Today, Port Royal is a quiet little town, easygoing, laid back. The inhabitants have their share of contemporary problems and graces. But modern as they are, the people here still appreciate their island's remarkable history, its extraordinary past. For strange as it may seem in today's world, they are the heirs of a unique heritage. And in many ways, that heritage is still alive. Here, they still tell tales of the days when pirates roamed these streets, still boast on the waterfront of the buccaneer legends. And in this little harbor by the waters of the Caribbean, the archaeologists and inhabitants have an ambitious aim: to take a corner of the 20th century and breathe life once again into old Port Royal, to uncover the entire city beneath the waves and transform it into an underwater museum, the first of its kind, to recreate the city of the pirates, the city of ancient lore. Robert Stevens is involved in the planning.
One of the most important aspects of this project is that we're developing this for Jamaicans. And because it is going to be so fantastic, we would like to share it with foreign visitors who come to Jamaica. And this whole concept is going to give a lot of people more pride in ensuring that the attractions are properly maintained, properly managed. And we're going to create an entire park area out at Port Royal, a protected area for the environment of Port Royal.
To fuse the present and the past, that is the dream. But as the modern wrecks and sunken ships on the coastline of Jamaica attest, what happened then in Port Royal can happen again any time. The whims of nature are still as dangerous as ever, still capricious, still taking their toll. Nevertheless, the treasure hunt goes on. The archaeologists toil against silt and sand, against storms and hurricanes, and they dream of the day when the houses on land are restored, the city underwater uncovered. Will it come to pass? Who can say? But this is the dream. For now, a lethargic calm pervades the remains of the once so rich and riotous city. There is a legend that, on a clear day, the sunken treasure of Port Royal can be seen glittering in the water. Day by day, as the fishermen glide out over the waves, beneath them slumbers the sunken city.